Good evening, everyone. I'm Preeta. First and foremost, wish you all a very happy and prosperous 2021. Today we have Mr. Ram, our head IFA, Mr. Arun, our head research, and Mr. Anand, director equity with us. We are going to cover two topics in today's session. First is derivatives, complex strategies simplified, and second, is it time to revisit your client's equity exposure? Without wasting a single moment, let us ask Anand to start over our first topic, derivatives, complex strategies simplified. You can use your chat box option to post your questions or queries during the session. So over to you, Anand.
Thanks, Pita. Good evening, all. So, what I'll do is we have done a very basic session on derivatives 2-3 months back, and we want to cover the topics which are a bit more complicated. When I say complicated, complicated to the tune of understanding at a later stage. So, I have split again this session into two, wherein I'll explain the terminologies, I'll explain the details about what are the next steps in derivatives, and then leave the strategies for the next one. So for sure, we can have a next month session for around 30-35 minutes, which wherein I'll explain the details of the strategies. Today, I will try to cover, as it's been 2-3 months time, I'll try to cover what I have done in the last session for 4-5 minutes. I'll just brush on the basics and then move from there in explaining each and every topic in detail. So last session, we have the first two slides will cover about what we did in the last session. So we spoke about what is the basic of what is derivatives, and then what is an F&O and all that. So derivatives as a definition, as I have read it, it's just a definition, an instrument which is derived from an underlying asset. So you have an asset which is predominantly a stock, and then you derive a value out of it that is called as derivative. Now there are different varieties of derivatives: futures, options, and swaps. Swaps we don't want to get in because in India it is not very prevalently available. So we'll talk about futures and options. So what is a future? So the normal lingo is F and O. People say F and O, which is future and option. So what is future and option? Future is something which is based on the stock. Option is based on the future. Let's say I'll give an example. Normally I like to take the example of SBI. I'll take the example of SBI again. SBI is a share, and there are futures derived out of the share. Now, one share of SBI, again, for the sake of common understanding, I've taken it as 200 rupees in the last session. So I'll keep that as 200 rupees, even though the price have gone up from there. So 200 rupees, one share. Now, in futures, it is not based on one share. It is based on a concept called as a lot, one lot. So one lot of SBI is around 3,000 shares. So you'll have 3,000 shares into 200. So one lot is equal to 6 lakh rupees. So that is future. Now, what is an option? Option is based on the future strike prices. What is the strike price and all? I'll explain at a later date at a later time in the same presentation. I've got different thoughts on what is the strike price, how to do it. All those things will be explained. So it is basically F&O is nothing but future and option. So there are a lot of terminologies which are very different different than compared to the normal cash market. So these terminologies are a lot, or an index, options, or a lower, or what is an index feature, what is a stock feature. All these terminologies also I'll explain in this session. Now, again, last time I told you, why do people use them? There are three basic methodologies of why people use them. One is for hedging, one is for arbitration, and the third one is a financial gain. So when I say hedging, means you already have some position, you want to hedge that. You want to safeguard yourself. When arbitration means that there is a quick opportunity, you want to grab that opportunity, that is arbitration. Financial gain is nothing but, I told you last time also, that it is nothing but gambling, wherein you take naked positions. We call them naked positions without any cash existing position. So these are the three reasons why people use derivatives. This is also last time slide. So what is hedging? So let's say a client has a portfolio. of 50 lakh rupees. Now his stocks are diverse, means he has got different stocks. How can he do? He can hedge himself by, just a minute, I'm admitting, yeah, we can hedge himself, he can hedge himself by taking some puts. Now, why does he need to hedge? For safety or for some unforeseen events or to protect gains. Last time we told that US elections are near, and then people want to hedge themselves, and there is an event, a local event like Indian elections, or there is an assembly elections coming, there is budget coming around. So people want to safeguard their positions, so they hedge their positions. So they can either take index puts if their portfolio, means, let's say my portfolio is worth 50 lakh rupees. When I say portfolio, like what it happens in mutual funds, you have mid caps, small caps, large caps. You can have like top stocks, 10 top Nifty 50 stocks. So Nifty has 50 stocks, Sensex have 30 stocks. So Nifty 50 stocks, I want to go into mid cap stocks, I want to go into small cap stocks. So if your portfolio is diverse, how can you do? You can hedge yourself by index puts. So what is an index put and all that stuff, I'll explain at a later date, at a later time, today itself. Now, if you have single stock, let's say what happens is someone want to build only a particular portfolio on basis of single stock. Like I only have Reliance with me, I only have SBI with me, I only have ICICI with me. How can you hedge yourself? By taking the puts of that particular stock itself. So that is basically hedging. Now, what is arbitration? In arbitration, let's say there is a difference between a future price and a stock price. Why will it come? I'll come and tell you again in the presentation. You can take a small arbitration gain. How and what, I will explain it to you today. Now the third one is for financial gain, which I clearly told it is purely for gambling, wherein we just take naked positions. Now this is what we covered in basics in the last session 2-3 months back. I will go to the next one. So I will explain the terminologies today. So there are different terminologies. I'll explain the basics of the terminologies. What is an index derivative? These are the first slot is a market specific terminology. The second with a client specific terminology, regulatory specific terminology, and some are generic. So I'll go in detail about each terminologies. Now, what is an index derivative? Okay. Now, you can buy as an individual or a corporate, you can buy shares of SBI, you can buy shares of ICICI Bank, Reliance, or any other stock. Now you can't buy Nifty because Nifty is a index. So what they did was, across the world there are index derivatives, means I don't want to buy only one particular stock. I want to buy the whole index because I'm confident about the country. So I will buy index. Now how can I buy index? There are small ETFs also, but if you want to go buy index, you can buy Nifty index. Like that, we have Bank Nifty index. Now Nifty is the index of NSE, Nifty 50 stocks. Sensex is the index of BSE. Sensex derivatives are also there, but they're not very active. So I'm not going in there. I'm just telling you what is the active index available. So index derivatives. So what you can do is you can buy Nifty, you can buy Bank Nifty, you can buy Nifty IT index. There are other indexes which have got irrelevant now because there was no volume in there. People were not very active. So they just removed that index. Pharma index was there. A lot of other indexes was there. In the next week, exchange, NSE is launching a financial services index. Nifty index, Nifty has 50 stocks. So all those 50 stocks are part of the Nifty index. Now Bank Nifty has got around 10 to 12 stocks. It varies. Now there are around 11 stocks in that. So all the 11 stocks will form part of the Nifty Bank Nifty index. In the Nifty Financial Services Index, I think there are around 20-25 stocks. They will come out with that stock list also in a couple of days' time. These 20-25 stocks will form part of the Nifty Financial Services Index. Now I can buy that index. So that is called as index derivative, wherein you can buy that index. You can buy futures of that index. You can buy options of that index. How can you buy options? I will explain to you. But these are called as index derivatives. Now, for the sake of convenience for everyone, what we'll do is we will take the market price. Whatever I am going to explain now, I'll talk about Nifty, and I'm saying Nifty is at about 14,100 to 150 now, but I'll just say Nifty is at 14,000. And one lot means one lot of Nifty, if you want to buy, it is actually 75, but I've just for the sake of convenience, I've taken 100. And what is margin? I will explain it. Why is it taken as 20% also? I'll explain. Now, the other part is futures. Now, Nifty also has futures. Nifty also have options. So futures are part of the whole derivative concept. Along with Nifty or Bank Nifty, there are around 200, 250 derivative future stocks, wherein you can buy the future of that share. Again, I'll go to SBI. Let's say we are skipping Nifty. We'll go to SBI. Now I want to buy one lot of SBI. Means you'll have to take 3,000 shares into 200 rupees. 6 lakhs will be your requirement. And the same way, what will happen is, as I told you last time, what predominantly people will do is, not only for the sake of buying, people also do selling, because I'm very sure SBI price will come down, because I know the net interest income of this quarter, or the NIMs or the profit will be bad. So I want to sell the shares of SBI. But in cash market, in the normal market, it is not possible, because you should have the shares with you, then only you can sell. But what you can do in the futures market is, you can go short. When I say short, means you are selling. When I say long, it is buying. So this is the terminology which people use. So when I'm going long, if your client says, I want to go long, means that you want to buy SBI future. You want to go short, means you want to sell SBI future. Now that way, you can actually go sell also the future of SBI without having the shares with you. As I told you last time, you don't need to have anything with you, whether it is any share with you. You only need to have margin. What is margin? I'll explain. You only need to have that specific margin with you, wherein you can go buy futures or sell futures. The same way, you can go buy Nifty and sell Nifty. Now, why do you want to sell Nifty? You may say that, no, I am somehow feeling that the next 2 months time markets will be risky, or the last 7-8 months time markets have been very good. So there may be a small fall. So I want to sell Nifty. I am not very sure which sector will fall. I'm not sure whether banking will fall, or pharma will fall, or automobile will fall, but there will be a small fall, wherein I want to capitalize on that fall. Rather than selling my mutual fund units, rather than selling my cash stocks, I want to go and sell Nifty, so that I can get benefited out of the small fall, whichever it comes. When I say fall, it can be anywhere 1%, 2%, 5%, 10%. So you can, it's all up to you. So you can go short in one particular stock, or you can go short in one particular index also. Now this is futures, wherein it is, you can go long, you can go short. Long is going up, which is like you're buying. Short is you're selling. Now there are two things of coming to options. Now there are two options. One is a call option, the other is a put option. What is a call option? For the sake of benefit of everyone, I'll tell you. If you are very bullish, means if you are very optimistic of any particular thing, whether it is Nifty, or whether it is SBI, or whether it is ICICI Bank, or any stock which is there in futures, you want to go long, but you don't have certain amount of money. What you do is, you will punt. We call it punting. You will go and buy a call option. Call option is predominantly you are betting that the stock price will go up, or the index price will go up. Now, what is a put? I'll just tell you, because these are very basics. Call is, if you are going, if you want the stock price, or if you are expecting the stock price to go up, you buy a call. If you are expecting the stock price or the index price to come down, you buy a put. Now, on the same way, you can sell a call and sell a put also. I'll come to that, but I'm just telling you the basics. The definitions of call and put is a very, very enlarged animal, but I'm just giving you very basics, so that you can say what is a call and what is a put. If you want to buy a call, if a client says buy a call, that means that he is bullish on that particular stock or index. If he says that buy a put, he is bearish on that particular stock or index. Bullish and bearish, I'm sure you are aware about that. Means if you are expecting the market price to go up or go down, you take calls and puts. Now, I'll come to the concept of margins first before I come to market. Now, what is a margin? So you are buying 14,000 is the market price, and one lot is 100 shares. That means that it is 14 lakh rupees. Exchange says you don't need to, for the cash market, you should have the whole 14 lakhs with you, right? If you want to take the shares on delivery. On futures, it will say give us only 20% of the margin. Means 14 lakhs, 20% is 2,80,000 rupees. That is the margin which the exchange requires you as a client. I'm talking to you as a client now. You as a client is stipulated to keep it with the exchange. Now, why I have taken 20% for the sake of understanding. It can vary. It can go to 11%. It can go to 30%, depending on the stock and depending on the volatility. So that is what the margin is. Margin is, let's assume for the sake of our understanding, 20%. So I need to have 2,80,000 rupees with me to buy one lot of Nifty. The same way, let's assume ICICI Bank. ICICI Bank, I'm just for the sake of convenience, I'm saying it is 2,000. One lot is 2,000 and the price is 500 rupees. That means the 10 lakh rupees. I need to keep 20% of the 10 lakh, which is approximately 2 lakh rupees as the margin with your broker. The broker in which is Funds India in turn will deposit it with the exchange as the margin, so that you can have that positions carried over. Means you can have those positions. So I discussed about this margin. What is an initial margin and span margin? I'll just give a very brief about it. The exchange says two margins. One is initial margin, means the minimum amount of margin, and what is the span margin? There is a haircut margin also, but I'm just skipping all that. These are the languages which the exchange use. We have 15% of the initial margin and 5% of the span margin. So in total, you don't break your heads. Just don't worry about the initial margin, span margin, all that lingo. Say margin required is 20%. If anyone from Funds India gets in touch with you, say that boss, your client is is required to have a margin. They will talk about everything put together. So it will say initial margin, span margin. So the margins required are 20%. So I need to have 2,80,000 rupees to buy one lot of Nifty, which is here. I'm just saying that. Now I'll come to the client specific mark to market. What is MTM? You will the moment you make your clients active, the most dreaded word will be MTM, mark to market. I'll tell you why. Let's assume the client has bought one lot of futures at 14,000 and the margin required is 2,80,000 rupees, which is 20%. And God forbid, it comes down by 1%. It comes down by 100 points, just for our understanding. 100 points. He has gone long, means he has bought Nifty, but the Nifty has fallen by 100 points. Now 100 points into 100, which is one lot, is 10,000 rupees. So instead of 2,80,000 rupees, which is his initial margin, he only have 2,70,000 rupees at the end of the day today, because the 10,000 rupees loss will actually be cut every day by the exchange. So he only has 2,70,000 rupees. So now 2,80,000 rupees was the initial margin, and unfortunately it fell down by 100 rupees. 10,000 rupees is the loss. Now 10,000 rupees will be cut immediately on the same day from the exchange, from the client's margin, which instead of 2,80,000 rupees, it will be 2,70,000 rupees. The 10,000 rupees is considered as mark to market. Means you are marking your positions to the market. Means you will have the client have to submit that extra 10,000 rupees before tomorrow morning. The client have to transfer the funds before tomorrow morning when the exchange opens. So this is the norm. It is not with Funds India, nor with anyone. It is the norm by the exchange. It is this other way around also, wherein it goes up by 100 rupees. Means he has made 10,000 rupees. If we still want to hold that rather than booking profits, he'll have a mark to market of 10,000 rupees profit, which he can withdraw the next day evening. No worries at all. That also is possible. Or if the client says, no, I'll keep that as a safety. If it goes down further, I'll keep that. He can keep that. Now, assuming I'll go to this now. Assuming it has gone up by 100 rupees today. First, let's say it has gone down by 100 rupees today, 10,000 rupees. The next day morning, the client deposits 10,000 rupees. So he again have 2,80,000 rupees with him. Now the next day, the second day, it has gone up by 100 rupees. Means it has come to his cost. The 100 rupees fall has been covered. So he will have 2,90,000 rupees in his account. The extra 10,000 rupees will be there in his account. He can withdraw. He can keep it for the sake of safety. Anything. So that is called as mark to market. So every day, the mark to market file will be derived from the exchange at about 8 o'clock and sent to the clients in case if he is having a shortfall. We call it as a shortfall. The language is shortfall, means you have to cover some of the money which is supposed to be paid to the exchange, as it is a shortfall of the original stipulated amount prescribed by the exchange. If it is an up, no one exchange will not ask anything. If it is a shortfall, the exchange will say that you're supposed to pay 10,000 rupees. We'll get it from the exchange and we'll pass it on to the client immediately, saying, please fill 10,000 rupees to the exchange to have your positions normally next day morning. Now, what will happen if he doesn't pay? The next day, the exchange will ask you to cut the positions. Means the client have to reduce his positions. The clients will have to sell his positions. If the client still says, I will pay and I will not be paying it today, and he says that no, I should have that position at any cost, normally the brokers, which are we, will not allow the position to be held. But in extreme to extreme cases, if the position is still hold, there will be a penalty which will come in. The penalty varies from 1% of the shortfall will go to as high as 5% of the shortfall. Means if the margin shortfall is 10,000 rupees, on the first day, it will be 1%, means 100 rupees will be his penalty. On the second day, it will be 2%. On the third day onwards, it will be 5% of his penalty continuously. If he continues to hold the position, unfortunately, for various reasons, on the fourth day, the exchange will block the client for a month. So it is not within us. The exchange will block the client. So they'll send it to us, and we'll have to take action on that. That is called as a shortfall, and that is the other part is called as mark to market. Now I have put some very important items as blue. One is time value of money. So what is time value of money? I'll come to it at a later time, because this has to be explained along with the next slide. So I'll just keep it open now for the next slide. Now margins I have explained. Now F&O ban. What is F&O ban is, if the futures of that particular stock breach 95% of the limits. What is a 95% of the limits? 95% of the market wide position has been breached. The exchange will ban that stock. Means that you cannot take any further positions of that particular stock, either in futures or in options. So this is a very very vast point, which I don't want to dig into at this point of time. I'll just give you a very brief about it, that F&O ban is something which is not a very easy thing to understand. So we'll keep it for the next session. The basic thing is 95% is breached of the market wide positions. The exchange will say, please don't take any further positions in this stock, SBI or Reliance, whatever it is. What if you already have that stock with you? You can sell it, or you can buy it back. If you are long, you can sell it. If you are short, you can buy it back. So that also is not an issue. The other point is rollover. I'll cover that rollover now. What is rollover is, like in cash market, unlike in cash market, if you are having 100 shares of SBI, you can hold it for eternity. Means you can hold it till the time you want to. But in futures and options, there is a specific date called as expiry day, which is the last Thursday of every month. Now that is a monthly expiry. Weekly expiry will come to you. Monthly expiry. So on the last day, Thursday, what you have to do is, let's assume that you have gone long. So when means you have bought SBI, or you have bought Nifty one lot of 100 shares, and you want to carry that over for 1 year. So what you have to do is, before the last Thursday of the month, or on the last Thursday of the month, you have to cut the position. Means if you are long, you'll have to sell the position and buy the next month's position again. We call it rollover. Rollover. If you feel that no, I don't want to do it right away, I will cut my positions, wait for some time and then do it. That's up to you. But if you want to do the same position the next moment, it is called as rollover. That is a market lingo. Means you are rolling over the position to the next month. You can't hold it for eternity. You have to roll over the position to the next month. Means you'll have to, on the last Thursday or before the last Thursday, you will have to take a opposite position. Means you're long, you sell it, then again take a long in the next month position. So that is called as rollover. Now expiry dates. Last Thursday of every month is the expiry day for all the futures, stock futures. For all the stock futures, 200, 250 stock futures which are there in derivatives market, stock futures and stock options, the last Thursday of every month is called as an expiry day. Now there are weekly expiries also, which the exchange have introduced 1.5 years back. on index derivatives, which is Nifty, Bank Nifty, and the financial services index, which will come in. There are weekly expiries wherein only the options you can take weekly. The futures will anyway be the last Thursday. Only the options you can trade weekly, means next week Thursday, the week after that Thursday. Every Thursday there will be a weekly expiry only for the index options. So this is what is called as weekly expiry and monthly expiry. So for the sake of no confusion to you, please keep it in mind. Thursdays are very, very important days for any guy who's trading, because if you want to trade in options of indexes, every Thursday is busy. Every Thursday is an rollover expiry day, so he will trade a lot. Last Thursday is anyway the main expiry. For the sake of our understanding, we'll call it main expiry, weekly expiry. So these are the expiry dates. Now there are other very generic terms called as open interest, put call ratio, circuits, and all that stuff. So I will just talk about open interest. Means how many people are interested, how much is open, how much of interest is open in this particular stock. So I don't want to get deep into it because it's a very vast topic. And the other called is put call ratio. People talk about how many puts are there, how many calls are there, what is the ratio. So they do analysis basis on the put call ratio, open interest, and then understand whether this stock can go up or not go up, or this stock will go down or not go down. So these are the different ways of analyzing the particular stock. Now, what is circuits? On normal stocks, the circuits means if the stock is at 100 rupees, it goes up by 20%. You cannot buy that stock anymore because it will be in circuit. There will be a lot of buying interest. You have to wait in the queue. The same way, if it goes down by 20%, 80 rupees, you will not be in a position to sell because there will be a lot of selling interest. So circuits, we call it circuit filters. Circuit filters can be 20%, 10%, and 5%, depending on the volatility. Exchange will decide the circuit filters. For derivative stocks, there will not be any circuit filter. Means if it goes up by 15%, 20%, 25%, 100% also, there will not be any circuit filters. The exchange leaves it because it is an open market. So these are the basic terms. Now, what I left in this screen is time value of money. So I'll just speak about the time value of money in the next slides. Yeah. Now in the second slide, I said option strike prices. What is an option strike price? This will be the last slide for the day. There are other slides. I'll show you the slides, but I'll explain them in the next section. Now, like the way you are buying futures, you want to buy options. Now, how will you buy options? Options is not the same animal as futures. You have to buy strike prices of options. Now, what is a strike price? Let's say, again, for the sake of understanding, I've said market price is at 14,000, margin taken is 20%, one lot is 100. Now, we are at 14,000. You can see here, the strike prices means you are saying that I want to buy. Let's say you are bullish on the market. You want to go long on the market. What will you do? You are expecting the market will go up by 1,000 points. Means from 14,000, you are expecting it to go to 15,000. But you don't have so much money to buy one lot each. One lot will require 14 lakhs, 20%, 2,80,000 rupees. Now, what will you do? I'll say I will buy options because I'm very, very bullish. So you go here and buy a 14,500 or a 14,400 or a 14,300. These are all the strike prices which the exchange will decide. Let's say if the price is 100 rupees, the exchange will say every 2 rupees there will be a strike price. Means that strike price means I am striking it. I am expecting that the price of this current instrument will strike that, means will hit that. So the strike prices are decided. So I've given for the sake of convenience 100, 100, 100. Weekly expiries have 50 rupees also. So 13,000, 13,100, 13,200, it goes on. It goes down to 10,000, it goes up to 17,000 also, the strike prices. Now, what is the benefit? The benefit is, assuming I want to buy a lot because I'm sure it'll go up. But for one lot, you require 2,80,000 rupees. But I only have 50,000 rupees with me. How will I get benefit out of this? What will I do? I'll take one strike price, one option at a higher price. I want the market to go up, but I want to make a lot of money, not with one lot. I want to take 10 lots. Now, how can you take 10 lots? in options, again, the same lot concept will come in. 100 will be one lot. Assuming it is at 14,000, you say, okay, fine. I will buy a 14,500 call of the month at 50 rupees. Now 50 rupees into 100 is 5,000 rupees. So you only need 5,000 rupees to buy one lot of call option of 14,500 strike price. Now this is what is called as a strike price. For Reliance, the strike price will be different. For SBI, the strike price will be different. Strike price is nothing but at a particular time, assuming today is at 14,000, the exchange will say the strike prices for this month, the strike prices for the next month, the strike prices for the next month are these. The exchange will come out with the strike prices and will tell you. And the option premiums will be decided by the demand and supply. If the demand is too high, means everyone is expecting the market to go up, your 14,500 call instead of 50 rupees monthly will actually be at about 100 rupees. If everyone is expecting the market to fall, but you are expecting it to go up, this 50 rupees may be only 30 rupees. But it is based on these are all called as premiums, option premiums. These premiums are decided on the basis of demand and supply. Okay, so I will explain the basics of what is options, and then I'll tell you. There are two varieties of options: in the money and out of the money. What is in the money? In the money in basic language is if the market price is above the strike price. So the market price is 14,000. I have written it as spot. We call it spot. So market price is 14,000. If the market price is above the strike price, it is called as in the money. If the market price is below the strike price, it is called as out of the money. These are the two varieties of options which people take. Now, if you see, I have kept it as blank here because 14,000 is considered as 14,000 is the current price. So anything below it is in the money, above it is out of the money. Wait, I will tell you. Now, for the sake of understanding, I have done this. Now, what is in the money in call? Means call means you are expecting the market to go up, right? So, sorry, 13,000 strike price. Market price is 14,000. So the market price is higher than the strike price. So the prices will be high. So this is in the money. Here, this is also in the money because you are talking about a put. A put is exactly the opposite of a call, wherein you are expecting the market to go up. A call wherein you are expecting the market to, sorry, put is wherein you are expecting the market to go down. Call is wherein you are expecting the market to go up. So it will be opposite. The strike prices will be opposite. So for a call, the strike price should be lesser than the spot price. For a put, the strike price should be higher than the spot price for the in the money concept. The same way out of the money. If we just look at it, the ones which are marked in green here are in the money in calls and in the money in puts. And here, out of the money, this is what is out of the money in puts. And this is what is out of the money. Sorry, this is what is out of the money in calls. This is what is out of the money in puts. So I have, for the sake of understanding, I have given it in different color coding so that you all understand. What we can do is, I can share, this is not a proprietary presentation. I can share it with Ram, and he can share it with people who wants it. They can look at it and prepare your questions and send them to us, so that it is not a topic which you can or anyone can easily understand. I took almost 6 months to understand what are the basics. So I don't want to rush through things, even though I'm just trying to see as much as possible, explain it in a small, very detailed manner. I will send the presentation to Ram. He can share it with you guys so that you can have a look at it. Now, in the money and out of the money are a very complicated concepts. I just told you so that you understand the basics of options are, you have to have a concept called strike price, in the money, out of the money, put call. Just keep these things in your mind. Strike price, put call. Leave, if you are confused, leave the in the money, out of the money thoughts also. Strike price, call, put, call, put. Leave this weekly, monthly also now. Just only say strike price, call, put. All these things will come at a later time, no worries at all. Now, I just want to make sure that options also people are clear about what is the difference between futures and options. Futures means you are buying one lot and then you are holding that position till the end of the month. Options means you are buying a strike price call or a strike price put at that particular price, means you are expecting the price to go up to that position or go down to that rate, then only you will make money. Otherwise, you lose money. Now, what is the concept of losing money? Just a minute. Just a minute. I was talking about a concept called time value of money, right? So now what will happen with the time value of money is, as the expiry nears, means as the last Thursday of the month nears, the price will come. Assuming you have bought a 14,500 call at 50 rupees here. But unfortunately for you, the market went from 14,000 to 14,200 and it stayed there at that rate for 15 days. So as the expiry nears, nears to the contract, the prices will come down. This 50 rupees will come down to 5 rupees, 4 rupees, 3 rupees, 1 rupee, and it will decay. That is called as time value of money. So it will decay as the time progresses towards the expiry. So options are a risky contract, provided you don't have any hedging, or provided you don't have any strategies. It's a very risky contract. If you take a naked call or a naked put of any strike of any position, naked are always risky. This is what basics are. I will show you the next 4 slides, but I'll not take anything. So I just want to explain about how will the strategies help, and then what is that we are doing in terms of whether it is a risky position or a non-risky position. Then I'll talk about the derivative strategies. These 3 slides will almost take 40 minutes. So I will explain these 3 slides in the next presentation, because I don't want you to get bogged down with a lot of confusion. In the next presentation, I will again take you through the whole of this presentation for 5, 6 minutes or 10 minutes, and then take the rest 30 minutes to explain the strategies and other thoughts. So Ram, I am open for questions now. It's a very vague subject, so please don't feel that I'll have to ask a question now. You can drop your questions to Ram at any point of time. We'll address. I have got my research team also on the call. Sorry. So any of us can address your questions at any point of time. No worries at all. So Ram, I can take questions for 5 minutes and then I can leave it across to Arun.
Absolutely, Anand, absolutely. So thank you so much for this elaborate session. Even I've learned a lot, so thank you so much for that. But Anand, I think we have got one question from Vishal, which you can address it, and then anyway people can pose their questions also. Yeah.
Okay, if the spot price is 14,000, if I'm buying a call for the strike price of 13,000, that means that I'm expecting the no, sir. When you're expecting the market to fall, you should take a put. Okay, I'll say the question. If the spot price is 14,000 Nifty, and if you are buying a call of 13,500, that means that you are expecting the market to go up. If you are expecting the market to go down, you should take a put of 13,500. So that's the exact opposite. Okay, there is one more question. How much risk if a call or put goes wrong? Sir, if you are buying a call or a put, the risk is only to the tune of the amount which you have invested. I'll come there. So I have not spoken about selling calls and selling puts here, because I have left it for the next session. I'm sorry. Assuming I'll go to the same thought of 14,000, perfect. So I will talk about this one. Let's assume here I am buying a call of 50 rupees of 14,500, or I am buying a put of 50 rupees at 13,500. If the market won't go to 14,500 but stays at about 14,300, the maximum loss will be 50 rupees into that 100, which is 5,000 rupees. The same way, the maximum loss if the market won't fall, if your put is 50 rupees into 100, which is 5,000 rupees. But your loss will be unlimited if you write, means if you sell call and sell put, which I'll explain at in the next session. what I'll do is I'll just take one last question, Ram, and then we can give it across to Arun.
Yes, Anand. Yeah.
Yes, I said that I should go for put and call option together. No, I am not suggesting you should go for put and call option together. What I'm saying is, if you are having a view, again, these are naked calls and naked puts, which I have spoken about because these are very basic. If you are having a view, you should take one side position. But if you feel that, no, I don't have a view, but I feel markets will be very volatile because of the upcoming event, then you can take both. You can take a call and put so that you can, one side you will be protected. Let's assume the market, you are expecting the market to fall or go up by more than 8-10%. Then you take a position on both sides. But if you are expecting the markets will only go up or only go down, you should take call and put. But again, I'm reiterating, these are naked calls and puts. I'm not suggesting anything because naked calls and puts are very, very, very risky. The strategies will come in the next session. So, but if you're having a view, you take one-sided. If you don't have a view, take both sides if you're expecting it to be volatile. But these are for the pros, very risky stuff, which is not what I am suggesting to anyone. Don't get into options without getting into the next session, which I want to take again for 30-35 minutes so that I can explain about strategies. We can take as many questions on mail as possible. We have our research guys by name Vetri and Perumal. They are experts on this subject. They are quant-based technical analysts, and their expertise lies in futures and options. So we can help you in case if you want any specific queries.
Wow. Thanks a lot, Anand. So it was a very wonderful and learning session. So now quickly, let's move to our second interesting topic of the day. Is it time to revisit your client's equity exposure? This will be taken by our own research head, Arun. So Arun, sir, you can take it forward from this.
Yeah, thanks, Preeta, and thanks a lot, Anand, for simplifying such a complex topic. So even I'm not, I had to learn a lot about this. So yeah, cool. So that's done. So I'll just share my slide and. So broadly, this is probably the one single most important question which is running in all of our clients' minds, and also in a way we are also running through this question almost day in and day out, right? Because the markets have kind of been on a roller coaster, right? We had a 40% kind of a fall in March, and post that right now it's somewhere close to 80%, 90% up. From those levels, right? So the immediate question that all of us have is that what should we do? Should we book profit? Should we reduce equities? Should I completely come out of it? And for new money, how do I enter? So there are a lot of these difficult questions to answer. So that's what we will probably try and attempt to answer during this particular session. Yeah. So the starting point is simple, that now that the markets are at all-time high, should we sell equities? Okay. So before we move in, let us first try and demystify this whole concept of all-time high, because each and every time there is an all-time high, naturally we find these questions, because in Jan, Feb, we again found these questions, and the year back also. So whenever the market gets into this all-time high, we immediately start getting these jitters on will the market fall. So first, let's just step back and look at it logically, right? Now, equities at the end of the day, in the longer run, is a simple call on the earnings growth of that particular country's top 100 or top 200 companies, or basically whatever is the index representing. Roughly, if the companies, whatever is the earnings growth going to be, more or less the Sensex or the Nifty or whichever is the index, whether it's S&P 500, broadly the equity returns will also mirror that. So net, if our assumption is that Indian companies will continue to grow their profits over the next 10-20 years, it essentially means that the index will keep going up. So roughly, let's say if we are growing at 12%, it means that in another 6 years we will double. If you're growing at, let's say, 10%, it means roughly in another 7+ years we will double. So at, let's say, we were at, let's say, 45,000 Sensex, it means naturally it will go to 90,000 after, let's say, 6 or 7 years, depending on whatever is the returns, whatever is the earnings growth that is getting to fall. So which means that in an asset class which is going up, over the longer run, it is inevitable that we will always meet with the all-time highs, because today it might be, today 50, whatever, today 47,000 might be all-time high, but net over the next 7 years, we'll have different levels where we'll cross 50, we'll cross 55, we'll cross 60, and eventually it will go to 1 lakh, and post that it will go to 2 lakh. So because it's a growing asset, right? So that's how you, that's the fundamental assumption. So which means all-time high is just inevitable. Okay, so there is nothing wrong. So any growing asset, be it gold, real estate, or equities, we will eventually have to see a lot of these all-time highs. Now let's look at so whatever I told, what we have done is we've simply marked all the all-time highs in red. So as you saw in Nifty 50, for almost from 19, we plotted it from 1990 till today. So that's like almost close to 30 years. So you can see that there are several red dots which indicate the all-time high. So it means that all-time high is a natural phenomena. There's nothing to worry per se about an all-time high. And this is the same chart which is plotted for the US index S&P 500 for a long. It's almost from 1950s. The data is there, and you can see how many reds are there. Right? So inevitably, these all-time highs will come. And similarly, for emerging markets also, you find a lot of these all-time highs. Okay. So the first and foremost important thing is that there's nothing wrong about these all-time highs. Now, the natural intuition is there. So one is that we will obviously see a lot more all-time highs. So at some point in time, it will be 50,000, at 55,000, 60, and then so on and so forth. And it will eventually keep going up and up, right? So now the key question is, when we invest, or let's say we have money at an all-time high, the natural intuition is that when it is at an all-time high, most likely the markets will fall down. Okay, there will obviously be some all-time highs where the markets will fall down, but the key question is generally, like, whenever the market hits an all-time high, which is an eventual thing that happens, should we be worried? So what we did was, we did a very simple exercise. We took the last 20 years and we said, let's take all the all-time highs and assume that you invested during those all-time high periods. What was the next 1 year return, and what was the next 3 year returns in the Nifty 50 TR? So the good news is that 73% of the times on a 1 year basis, the returns were positive. Similarly, 86% of the times on a 3 year basis, the returns were positive if you had invested in an all-time high. And almost 50% of the times, the next 1 year returns were more than 15%. Okay. So which really means that, like, there is absolutely no logic, or the data doesn't tell us that immediately if there is an all-time high, will it fall? No, because 50% of the times, in fact, the 1 year returns have been more than 15%, and almost 70% of the times the returns have been more than 8%, and 73% of the times the returns have been positive. It gave positive returns. Right? So net, what we are essentially saying is that all-time highs per se do not mean that the markets are going to fall. Okay, so all-time highs is not something that neither us nor our client should worry about. So this is something that we've also written in our recent blog. So this data point is available there. So you can always use this data point, and you can also point them towards our blog. Okay. Similarly, there is a very interesting study which was done by JP Morgan on the US stocks, and this was almost from 1988. So what they found out was, whenever you invested during an all-time high, vis-a-vis during any normal other, apart from all-time highs, had you invested, what was the average 1 year return, 3 year return, and 5 year return? So the dark green line is your all-time high. So they found that on a 1 year basis, on average, every time you invested in an all-time high, you made around 14.5% return over the next 1 year, vis-a-vis 11.7, which was on any other day. And 3 years, again, similarly, you found that the returns were 50% vis-a-vis around 39%. Similarly, on a 5 year basis, the returns were 79% vis-a-vis 71%. So the whole idea is not to say at all-time high, you will always make high returns or low returns. The simple logic is that if you go by history, there's nothing to really say that, hey, there's an all-time high and hence I have to panic. So there's nothing special about an all-time high which will cause our markets to crash, right? So the other important point is, this again leads to the very, very interesting quote from Peter Lynch, which says that far more money has been lost by investors preparing for corrections or trying to anticipate corrections than has been lost in corrections. So a lot of us try to predict these falls, and then we keep waiting for the right time, and we end up losing far more money than the actual impact. So first leg, the most important point that I wanted to convey is that, to start off with, is that all-time highs are not equal to an immediate market crash. Some all-time highs obviously lead to a market crash, but the reason for the market crash is not an all-time high. Now the next question is, so if all-time highs is not something that we need to worry about, what should we actually worry about? Okay, because there are some points of time where even an all-time high can lead to a fall. But the point is, the causation factor is not an all-time. What really impacts the markets is where the question is. Okay. Now, the way to understand this is, the way we really look at it is that we can see, what we have really noticed is that over a long period of time, almost 80% of the times we have seen that equity markets are reasonably valued. Okay, they are neither too expensive nor too cheap. Most often than not, the group dynamics, or basically the fact that because there are so many investors out there with different opinions, more or less they even out each other, and we found that more or less they trade at the a fairly reasonable band of valuation. But that remaining 10%, we get very extreme. Remaining 20%, we get very extreme outcomes. So 10% we get really expensive valuations because something really good is happening in the markets, and we extrapolate that. And similarly, during bad times, like what happened in March, we again extrapolate the negative side as well. So now the way to really understand this phase is that market goes through 4 phases. Okay, one is the bull run that we all know, that market continues to move up along with the earnings growth, and the valuations also keep moving up. But once this continues for, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years, then the market becomes to go overboard. So the valuations start running up much ahead of time, and eventually it becomes a bubble. Sometimes it reaches to a bubble stage, and sometimes it falls much before it reaches to a bubble stage. But bubble is when the valuations become unbelievably crazy, the earnings growth is probably at the top of its cycle, and the sentiment indicators are all extremely euphoric, right? So that's when a bubble comes, and then post that there's a burst, where so the first 20-30% there's a correction, and then after a 25-30% kind of a correction, you get the best phase. So maybe it goes to 40% or it goes to 50%, we do not know, but that's probably one of the best times to invest. So these are the 4 broad phases, and if you really look at where all the bubbles happened, it first happened probably in 1992, when there was the Harshad Mehta scam. Again, in 95, there was a 40% fall. The dot-com bubble at 56% fall. Again, the GFC, or the global financial crisis, in 2008, where there was a 60% fall. So all these are where bubbles really burst. I wouldn't call the recent pandemic a bubble, because it was finally an event-driven thing, because there are structural or cyclical bear markets, and there are event-driven bear markets. Event-driven is like something that we can't predict. So it's like you are driving at 40 kilometers and somebody drunk comes and crashes at you. These are risks that you can't do. So there will always be crashes which you can't predict, which are event-driven. And so there's no way, right? So let's say after 2 years, there's one more dangerous pandemic coming. We have no clue. It can happen after 2 years. It can happen after 3 years. So also this optionality is always there, and it can be something completely new that none of us know. So these kind of event-driven things we will never be able to predict. But the whole idea is these cyclical or structural bubbles provides a lot of signals. Now, it's not an easy task, but still it provides a lot of signals. So the real thing to worry about is, are we in a bubble? Okay, so now the question to ask is not whether we are at an all-time high, because all-time high is really not a problem. But the real problem comes when we are at all-time high valuations, if we are at all-time if we are at the top of our earnings growth cycle, and 3, if the sentiments are at all-time high, or otherwise are they euphoric. So these are the 3 things that we should ask. So it is not about all-time high in the market index, but it is always about three things. Is it about where we are in earnings growth, where are we in valuations, and where are we in sentiments? Okay, so this is going to be our framework. Now, so based on this is how we will be taking calls on when to go underweight on equities, or if underweight on equities is required or not. Yeah. Now, before we go ahead, the problem with these kind of models that people like me try to do is that now, since because I've also had a very, very long experience in seeing other people build models and myself build different models. First and foremost, the thing, and also I've studied a lot of these US based models, European based models, and all that. One of the most important things to realize is that it looks very simple, right? All we need to do is identify a bubble, and then we step it out, and all our clients are saved from a market crash, and we also end up being a superstar for all of our clients. So this is exactly how I was thinking 10 years back. And then after my 10 years, there are a few things which I learned. At that point in time, I couldn't articulate, but now it's a lot better. But I would want to give proof rather than me saying something. Okay. First and foremost, the most important thing is how much ever we have all these frameworks and all that, going out of the market and especially calling out a bubble is unbelievably difficult. Okay. Now I am just a normal person sitting out of Chennai. So yeah, so let me not even take my example, but let me give you the example of some of the world's best economists or best investors. So there's this guy called Jay Boorman, who writes in Twitter a lot, and he runs this fancy analysis where he looks at all the predictions which all these big guys have given. So you can see that from April 12, there have been like different people calling out for market crashes. So Bill Gross, who was the debt bond king, he said the cult of equity may be dying, but the cult of inflation may only have begun. So the real crash is dead ahead. Mark Faber said, prepare for a massive market meltdown. So this was in 2012. So you can look at it that each and every year somebody or the other, and all these are very, very well-known, reputed guys. Okay, so I'm not taking you through each and every one, but you can broadly see the scary headlines that comes, right? So which one? We are not doubting their intelligence, and every time you read through their rationale, it will be perfect. It's very, very difficult to find out loopholes, and it's super scary. But the point is, they've been wrong for almost 8 years. Okay, just think about it. 8 years they've been wrong, and it's not that their logic was wrong or something. It just shows that how difficult it is. Same thing, JP Morgan did one more fantastic analysis where they took all the big guys, like who had predicted the 2008 crisis, 2000 crisis, like Jeff Gundlach, Nouriel Rubini, Mark Faber, and all these are like phenomenally popular guys. Peter Schiff, in fact, has written a lot of books. So everybody cares, and then they've done it from 2010 till 16, 17, 8. Every year, somebody or the other comes and scares us out. Now, what they did is they went one step ahead and then said that, hey, if you had just followed these famous investors or economists and then had invested accordingly, okay, that is, you had moved out of your entire money from equity and then put it into debt, how much would you have made? Now, the point is that had you listened to any of these guys, you would have right now been underperforming by almost close to 30 to 65%. So which essentially means even if equity markets crash by another 30 to 60%, still you will more or less come to levels close to where they had asked you to exit. So that's the amount of opportunity cost which was done because you had followed if you had followed any one of these large guys. Okay. Now, again, the same thing happened in 2000. It's not just in calling a bubble. Even when the market crashes also, these guys become very, very pessimistic. So Ray Dalio said that this is bigger than what has happened in 2008. Now, Ray Dalio is the world's the largest hedge fund and the most reputed and the most intelligent investor, one of the most intelligent investors. So you can look at all the news here. So somebody says goodbye retirement. Devilish math would bring market down by another 40%, says Wall Street Journal. And so almost everybody, stocks could retest lows as virus peaks, but will be higher in 3 to 5 months. And then more, El Erian, again, one more very, very reputed guy says, don't read too much into stocks, sudden rebound. So the whole point that, and then again, Stanley Druckenmiller, who's like who's almost like the god of hedge funds, he said that he was humbled by the market. So the most important point that I wanted to convey is that while we have frameworks and all that, the point is it's a super difficult thing, even for these, like really all these guys have 20 years, 30 years of experience. So all these guys have got it wrong. Now again, this is an interesting event which happened in 2014 for me. One of my clients sent me this, and then where the Governor Raghuram Rajan was warning of a global market crash. Now at that point in time, I told I have no clue, but a lot of people can be wrong. Now just think about it. It's like Sachin Tendulkar is advising you something, and then there's a local street cricketer who's also telling you that don't trust Sachin, right? So obviously the client won't listen to me. And unfortunately, the client at some point in time, he started taking a lot of these opinions from the global market heads, and then he went completely zero into equities. And post that, for a long time, he was not able to enter. And at 17, he entered back because there was a long wait, and 17 was like completely confused the hell out of him. And again, so net, I've realized that the more you start following these economists, it becomes, finally you won't make money. And the last 10 years is something which is proven right. So I'm not saying these guys are wrong. The logic is right, but just that the markets are so complex that they will humble even them. So first thing is that so what does that lead us with? One is we will never take a all in or all out approach. Our basic level is first like to start with an asset allocation, which simply means that if we really knew when the markets will crash and all that, I will have 100 equity when there is a start of the bull market, and I'll go zero and then I get back to 100. That's not possible. Okay, whatever we've seen from global markets, nobody has ever done it, and we will also not be able to do it. So that's why we will begin with a simple asset allocation. While we know that debt will give us lower returns over long run, we'll still keep it for making the journey a lot more palatable. And again, we will completely avoid all in and all out kind of an approach. So our basic strategy is that we will adjust the equity exposure, especially if you are cutting equity exposure. We will do it only at extremes. So even if markets are slightly expensive and all that, we are still okay, because the pain of moving out and getting in is too difficult. And when will we do it? Only when we find the extremes at valuations, earnings growth cycle, and sentiment. Okay. Now, how will we do it? Will we go completely out of equity? No. So let's say if you have a 50% equity allocation and 50% debt, we will only go up to half of your equity allocation. We might want to move out. And again, that will only be in extreme cases. So that also we will grade it in 2 steps. So the first step, we will cut it to 1/4, we will cut equity allocation. The second step, we'll cut one more 1/4, and based on 2 triggers. So first one, we'll call it a trigger 1. And the second layer of safety we built is we won't move directly to a debt. We will also move only to BAF. So which means it won't exactly be 1/4. It will be even lesser than that. Why? Because worst case, if the client panics out and is not able to get back in, BAF will at least ensure that as market corrects at some point in time, or valuations start to become reasonable, the allocation is automatically stepped up, even if worst case we are not able to bring it back. So which is why we'll be very conservative. We'll be very aggressive when in a bear market to increase allocation, but to cut equity allocation is going against history, because 70% of the time market is always up. So we won't want to go too negative, but we do it in 2 levels. Trigger 1, 1/4 of equity, trigger 2, another 1/4 of equity. Now the question is, how do we figure out if currently we are in trigger 1, and or is it like both the triggers are cut? Okay, so essentially we're going to give, I'm going to explain to you as to what our framework to solve for this is, right? Because like obviously you can't have Arun's individual opinion affecting this. So we have put in place a simple framework which will instruct us as to what is the point in time where we have to go for trigger 1, and what is the point of time where we have to go for trigger 2. So broadly, if you really look at it, the context is simple. What we will essentially try to do when we are going underweight is basically we are saying that the future returns of equity is not going to be great. Now, future returns of equity net can be broken down into 2 parts. One is the earnings growth, and the second part is the valuations. Now, if you really think about it, it's like somebody jogging, and over a 5-year period or over the next 1 hour, the final location of where the guy is will really depend on where the jogger or what is the speed at which the jogger is running. But in the near term, the dog will go up and down. It will go forward, it will go backward, it will go sideways, and that's exactly your valuations, which is that it can go up or sometimes it goes ahead of the curve, sometimes it goes behind the curve, but we have no clue as to where the valuations will be at but over the long run, it is earnings. So net, if you figure out what is going to be the earnings growth and what's going to be the valuation change, we will essentially come back to figure out what will be the return expectations from equity. Now, while we have no clue on where valuations will be after 5 years, roughly we know that if it goes back to historical average, what will be the detraction or increase in terms of my overall returns. Okay. Now, this is not a theoretical construct. This is simply that if you really look at any good company over the long run, this is from Motilal's recently released report, which was trying to figure out all the top 25 wealth creators. You can broadly see the last two columns. Over the long run, the actual price movement is very, very close to the PAT CAGR. So, which means whatever is the earnings growth in the long run, the Nifty or the Sensex earnings price movement will more or less mirror that. And this is not theory, because this is how it's exactly played out in the decade between 2000 and 2010. Total return of index was 15%, where the earnings growth was 14%, and dividend yield you got around 2%, and then there was some PE derating. Sorry, PE derating. Okay, again in 10 to 20, you only made around 6% in Nifty. Why? Because earnings growth was only close to around 5.5%. Again, like around 1%, 1.5% in dividend yield. There was some PE re-rating. Again, 5 years also you can split it into same. So let's say the last 5 years you made only around 2% returns. Why? Because earnings growth was 4%. So in the same period between 2000 and 2005, the earnings growth was 18%, right? And again, if you see, so there are different periods where the earnings growth has been dramatically different. And broadly, if you really look at the total return, you can break it down into either the earnings growth or the PE rating, or basically the sum of both, and then the dividend yield. Now, dividend yield is roughly 1.5%. So net for the next 5-year return, we'll have to figure out what will be the earnings growth and what will be the valuations. Okay. Now, how do we do it? Very simple. So whenever the whole idea is mean reversion, that is, if valuations are extremely high, we know that over long periods of time, it'll again go back to the average or at least close to the average. So which means very high valuations means it's a slight negative. Similarly, what is going to be the earnings growth? Earnings growth is again cyclical. So if earnings growth has been low for a very long time, then it means that my future earnings growth potential can be slightly higher. And similarly, if it's been abnormally high for a 5-year period, then my future earnings growth can probably go down, because they are very, very cyclical in nature. So we've put in a framework where we said that if we are in bottom of earnings growth and at different valuations, where we will go underweight and overweight. Okay. Now the question is, where are we right now? So according to our framework, right now we think we are in high valuations. So there are 4 levels of valuations: low, average, high, and then very high. Now, are we at insane valuations like we were in 2008? Of course not, but definitely we are in high valuations. So if we were probably in the middle of earnings cycle or top of earnings cycle, we would have gone underweight. But right now, since we are at the bottom of earnings cycle, we are still neutral. And when it comes to sentiments, broadly, our view is that they are mixed sentiments. So that's why we are currently neutral. Now, what does neutral mean? Simply means that if your clients have been given a 70% equity allocation, 30% debt, continue with that. So by now, because of the market movement, it would have become, let's say, 80. Just bring it back to 70. And let's say if it was instead 50-50, now if instead of 50, it's moved up to, let's say, 60 or 65, bring it back to 50. Okay. So the first action point for all of us right now is that it is at neutral. Now the question is, how do we see now I am telling you this is high, this is bottom of earnings. So how do you know? So where's the data for all this? Okay. So first, let's start with the earnings growth. Pretty simple. If you really look at the long run earnings growth cycle, as I told you, there'll be strong periods of earnings growth. So first leg, it was 24% till 97. Then again, earnings growth fell almost -3% CAGR till 2002. Again, 23% CAGR till 2008. And again, for a long period of time, it's been around 6%. So net, the base is being set at a very, very low level. Again, if you look at ROE, it's at sub 10%, while in the peak, it was at 25% in 2008. So again, very, very low base. Again, if you look at the corporate profit to GDP, it's at 1.5%, which is almost like a 20-year low. And it was as high as 7.5% during 2008. So again, the base is super low. Again, if you look at credit growth, again super low. It was close to 25% in 25% plus in 2008. 2007 peak, it was almost 25, almost touching 30%. Capacity utilization 90% plus was during the 2008 peak, 2007 peak. But right now it's at 40. It's not even above 50%. So broadly, the first leg is that the base is very, very low. But the point is, so whenever the earnings growth comes, because we've been disappointed with earnings growth for a long time. But however, the point is, because the base is low, whenever it comes, there can be a very, very sharp jump in numbers, at least for the initial 1 to 2 years, because the base has almost been stagnant for the last 5 years, 6 years, 7 years. Now the question is, hey, this has been the same case for 3 years back, 2 years back, 3 years back, 4 years back, but nothing has happened, right? So the key point to understand is what really happened in the 5 years. Why hasn't this whole low base finally led to the cyclical recovery after a long point in time? So unfortunately, we had a sequence of events. So first, it all started with Demon, or probably the corporate bank NPA cleanup, which Raghuram Rajan started from 2015. So all the banks which are probably the biggest contributor to the overall Nifty profits, that was completely impacted for the last 5-6 years. But more or less the cleanup is done. And again, we had Demon, where again all the unorganized sector got severely impacted. Then we had RERA, then we had GST, then we had an NBFC crisis, which again exacerbated into everything. A lot of these auto segment, and a lot of people were not able to get the unorganized sector again got impacted because they were not able to borrow. Then there was collapse in commodity prices. The interest rate hike, interest rates were also much higher. They were somewhere close to 7-8%. If you remember, all our debt funds were giving 7-8% at that point in time. So which means companies were borrowing at 7-8%. And then again, the last leg was the COVID. So you had all these events hitting in the last 5 years, which means that the GDP growth was low and almost all the major segments were getting impacted. So if you really look at how the whole thing played out, you can see that primarily the earnings impact was impacted because of auto, energy, commodities, and healthcare, telecom, and then industrials. And again, corporate banks, especially in which is the main reason. Yeah. So broadly, if you really look at it from very, very high exposure as a part of the PAT, they've all come down dramatically. So you can see the banking, almost 50,000 crores was the profit in 2013. Now it's at 17,000 crores. In fact, it was negative last 2 years. So you can see the low base that's already set. Now again, auto, you will see the same trend. Commodities, you will see that earnings have stagnated. Energy is stagnated, and especially if you knock off Reliance, again it's stagnated. Healthcare was stagnating, but now it's kind of recovering because again they had a separate issue of the regulatory problem coming from global. And then industrials were impacted. Telecom, all of us know what happened. So all these segments, but if you really look at it, telecom, the problem is getting solved because right now it's only 2 players. Industrials, again, a lot of government reforms have gone in. Healthcare, we all know that suddenly there's a lot of relaxation by US. So all these problems are getting solved. Auto is again coming back big time because all the inventory has been cleared out, and now everybody also wants to own a vehicle because of the COVID related safety issue. Commodities have also started increasing in prices over the last 3 to 6 months. Again, energy is also finding the oil crash is more or less behind us. They are at pretty okay prices. Banks is also our sense is that the worst is over, and that's what is getting reflected in all the communication that we had with the from all the brokerages reports and from whatever we heard from the banking CEOs. That's the sense that we're getting, that the problem is not as bad as they expected, and more or less everybody is has prepared far more than what was what is being expected. Again, you can see that. So this is the, so base is strong, and most of the impact which happened in the last 5 years is more or less getting sorted. So everything seems to fall in place. The key was the second wave. Thankfully, it seems that right now, at least it looks like it's reasonably getting controlled in India. And anyway, the vaccine is also starting from the next 2 weeks. So we are also seeing initial signs of earnings recovery. So while the sales is still down, we can see the PAT growth is almost 17% in the last quarter. Now, why did this happen? Because there was significant cost cutting, and almost the margins across all categories have started to increase. Again, there's also a significant consolidation. If you look at all the segments, the last year, almost the top 3, 4, 5 guys have started to capture 80 to 90% of the incremental market share. So market consolidation is happening big time. So basically what is happening is big is getting bigger at the cost of the lower. So while all the problems are true at the lower end, the bigger guys have become extremely dominant. And on top of it, the interest rates have become really cheap. And as you know from the debt YTMs, the corporates, good corporates, are now borrowing at comfortably at 4%, 5%. Again, whenever oil prices have come down, and this is an interesting slide from Marcellus, where they found that whenever there's a US recession, the oil prices coming down, and followed by the 10-year yields also coming down, you've always found that India grew after that. So this is again one more factor which supports the whole thing. And the government has also gone ahead with several reforms. There's also the agri reforms, and again PLI scheme is supposed to be a very, very big game changer. So that's again something which is happening. Yeah. So that's again the whole thing. And again, if you look at the other factors which are supporting, the real estate has also gone up big time. Both Mumbai property prices and your mortgage rates have fallen to all-time lows in the last 20 years. So everything is broadly pointing towards the fact that there is a very, very good scope for earnings growth to go up. So while valuations aside, if you purely look at it from an earnings growth, you can find that broadly the case that we are making is there's a low base. Most of the worst events are behind us. And so at some point in time, earnings growth has to pick up. And thankfully now all the factors are falling in place. Low oil price, low borrowing cost, initial signs of economic recovery. There's no major impact from COVID. There's cost control measures. There's consolidation of market share, the government reforms, the banking system stress is also not as bad. So overall, our sense is that while we do not know what will happen in the next 3 months, 6 months, if you take a slightly longer time frame, our basic call is that we are at the bottom of earnings cycle, and more or less things looks like we are set for a very, very strong earnings cycle over the next 3 to 5 years. So that's the first leg. Valuations, if you look at it, P is very, very high at 27 times, but obviously the earnings are also depressed. MCAP to GDP is at 100, but in 2008 it was 150. It's still high. Price to book is more or less at average around 3 times. That's okay. But earnings yield to GSEC, which is with related to the GSEC yields, it's more or less close to long-term average. So overall, the context we are seeing is that across the world, the interest rates are super low, the liquidity is super high, and hence the valuations might stay high for some more period of time. So broadly, if you look at it in a single picture, this is our basic call, because the central banks have clearly told that they'll continue with the liquidity measures for at least 1 year till US inflation goes above 2% and the unemployment rate comes down dramatically. So our sense is that the valuations will kind of slightly be on the higher side. So again, sentiments, we broadly look at a few things, 4 things. One, dollar index. Whenever dollar index goes up, emerging markets do really well, because this means that this is the safety heaven. So as and when this, it means higher risk-taking capability. Again, broadly, this is reflecting in significant inflows from foreigners. So if you look at the last left-hand side part, you will see that all foreign inflows have been dramatic. The exact reverse is happening in domestic investors, which is a good thing, because both of them positive means that sentimentally it's a dangerous signal, because everybody is getting too bullish on or too euphoric. So because there are two different opinions, it's in a way it's a good thing. Again, India is the only country which has got positive inflows across Asia, which is again a great thing from the foreign investors. And again, usually we have seen that bubbles happen when the the CAGR is unbelievably high. So at 45% or 20% plus what you saw in mid caps in 2018, or in 2008, it was almost a 45% CAGR, but now it's still at 12, 13. So there's nothing to call it like a euphoria. Again, IPOs, if you see the trend, it's nothing, it's nowhere close to what we saw in 2008 kind of a number. It's still reasonably okay. While there is initial signs of euphoria slowly dropping in, so overall, our sense is the sentiments are mixed. So it's not pointing towards a bubble. So net putting it together, our broad call is that earnings growth is still at bottom. Valuations are high, but whenever it reaches very high, is where we will start getting a little more. That's when we will go for the underweight position. And sentiment, we are seeing that broadly it's a mixed signal. So based on this, right now we will continue to be at neutral, but at some point in time, with valuations just continue to keep moving up. So let's say after next 2 weeks, for some reason Sensex become 55,000, or let's say 50, let's say 60,000, argument say, with none of these parameters dramatically changing, right? So then obviously the valuations have become very, very high. So at that point in time, we might go for moderate underweight. So overall, the whole context is that right now we won't go extreme underweight, which is at 50% cut we won't do, because we are still at bottom of earnings cycle. So the maximum we will go is 25% of equity allocation into BAF, and that too if the valuations continue to go. So overall, the call is simple. If your clients need the money in the next 3 years, please reduce and exit equities. But if it is not required for the next 3 years, and if your equity allocation is much more than your original allocation by 5%, just bring it back to the original allocation, right? And within equities, try to allocate definitely 20% to value as a category, because value is still very, very cheap. And again, mid and small cap is also reasonably okay in terms of valuation. So overall, you are balancing out the risk within equities. And if let's say, despite all this, clients are very, very panicky, just move a small portion to BAF as and when the market goes up, so that the client feels a lot more comfortable. So overall, trigger 2, we don't see it going because unless and until it's still at the bottom of the earnings cycle, we will never go for trigger 2. Trigger 1 will come at some point in time. So that is something that we are keenly watching for it. If market continues to go up without the fundamentals catching up, at some point in time, we will have to take this particular call. And the key thing is, we will move only to a dynamic asset allocation funds and not the debt funds, not the directly into debt funds. So that's the broad call. And again, what we've also done is, just to make this whole thing a little more simpler, we will also be sharing with you. So what we have essentially done is, we've also created a simple PDF which will have our entire view, the reasons why we are taking this call. It will just be a 3-pager, and we track a set of 26 indicators. So you don't need to trust Arun on this, or Funds India, or let's say any analyst on that, but you see all these numbers, where it was in 2008, where it's in present, what's our view. So based on this, you can take a concrete data-based call. But the key is, don't get enamored. So a lot of people will only show Nifty P and then scare you. So the point is, they will try to focus your attention on one of these parameters. But the way we look at it is, it has to be at a holistic level, where we look at all these 26 indicators. So right now, 18 is in green, primarily because of the earnings growth factor. 2 is in yellow and 6 is in red. So overall, this is what we simplified and we put it in the presentation. But that's the 2-pager that you'll get. Yeah, so that's broadly it. So that's how we are going. So the simple takeaway is that we are still at neutral, but whenever we go to the under trigger 1 and go to underweight 1, we'll let you know. Now, finally, you can take your own call, but we'll also give you the data in terms of why we are taking the underweight position 1 whenever that hits. But we are okay with slightly higher valuations because of the current context of extremely low interest rates. Sure. Yeah, that's broadly what I wanted to communicate.
Okay, thanks a lot, Arun. This session was much more needed, at this point in time. So any questions, please post in the chat box. Arun will take 2 questions at least.
So really sorry, I think it was, see, this is the first time we are sharing this framework. It's a fairly detailed one. So obviously the time was not enough for me to take you through all the nuances, but this is something which has evolved over the last 10 years for me. So I've made a lot of mistakes, and I've seen a lot of large guys going wrong. So which is why I'm very, very cautious when it comes to taking underweight calls, because as I told you, all the major US guys have got it wrong. So we always have to ask, saying that if Raghuram Rajan can go wrong, what are we? So we have to have a very holistic framework. So which is why you don't trust me as well. Just look at the data which we will provide you, and then you take your own call. So look at my view as one more view, but yeah, the way I've done it is we will directly go by the 26 indicators, and then we will comprehend it. So that, like, you, even if we go wrong tomorrow, we know why we went wrong, because we can always go back and see these indicators saying where did it really miss. Now, does that mean that it won't go down again? It can go another 10%, 20%. So that is not something that we can control, but yeah, but it's always helpful to have a framework.
Arun, there is one question for you in the chat box. Can you please take that?
Yeah, what are the best funds where exposure can be taken in this neutral scenario? See, for us, the simple idea is the 5-finger framework, where take your 5 fingers, you will have to be allocated 20% into 5 different styles. So one is quality. Quality would be somebody like Axis, or let's say, Axis would be the best play on quality, or somebody like DSP Quant Fund, so which are like very, very high quality names that is a part of our recommended funds. The second finger would be the value, something like ICICI Value Discovery Fund, or somebody like UTI Value Opportunities, which is what we have as a part of our recommended funds, or Franklin Focus Fund. And the third would be the mid and small cap segment. In there, you can obviously, all of you will have your own other, but again, for us it will be DSP mid, or Kotak Emerging. Again, the fourth basket would be on the GARP strategy, which is somebody like Mire or somebody like Parag Parikh, where it's a kind of blend of both. It's a midway path. Neither are they like too contrarian, where they go into beaten down names like PSU, or so they will take the mid path, and neither are they like Axis, where they will say, I don't care about valuations, but I want the highest quality and I want the consistent, more like the Marcellus types, but they are a midway path like PPFAs, Mire, Kotak. So all these guys would fall there. And the last leg is the international piece. So where we currently are going for NASDAQ. So if you combine all these 5 together, it gives you a phenomenal blend. Right now, both the value and small and mid cap would be super cheap, while the other 3 are, while the GARP as a strategy, or the blended strategy, will still be okay. The quality and the international basket will be slightly expensive, but that is still fine, because let's say if something again goes wrong with the global growth, these 2 baskets will continue to save us. So that's how we are positioning our equity portfolio. Simple 5-finger strategy.
No more questions here. So I think we can end the session now. So thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks everyone. So one sec, I think there's one questions. So yeah, we Ramnath has asked, saying that can the selected funds on the portal be classified? Yeah, we are actually we are moving towards classifying all our selected funds in terms of the 5-finger strategy, but we also publish a fact sheet every month, beginning maybe within the first 5 days. There's a fact sheet, so you can ask Venkat for that, so he'll be able to distribute that. So you will be able to see what is our model portfolio, which follows the 5-finger strategy and its performance. It's a simple 1-pager, and there's also a PPT if required. You can ask for it, but yeah, but the single 1-pager will more than communicate all the nuances of the strategy, and you can obviously adapt it based on your convenience. But we found that to be a very, very good strategy, because it'll force your clients to invest both in non-performing styles as well as performing styles, because otherwise you will only end up in performing styles, and when they non-perform, your entire portfolio goes for a toss. Yeah, so the 5-finger strategy was, we had done an earlier presentation on that. See, the idea was very simple. I'll just try to sum it up in 1 or 2 minutes. After 10 years, what I've realized is that all funds, right? You take any fund, let's say HDFC, which was once upon a time a superstar, or ABSL Frontline Equity. You take any fund. So right now, maybe Mire is superstar, Axis is superstar. But what I've realized is that all these superstar funds will become a duds at some point in time. So 2-3 years back, everybody wanted L&T mid cap, everybody wanted Sundaram, everybody wanted. So you would have by now realized it over a point of time that how is it that every time we select a particular fund, after 3-4 years, the client is ending up with a fairly bad experience. And sometimes we also think that what are these mutual fund guys doing? So what I've realized is that it's not the fault of mutual funds, but the way it really works is just like how in a cricket team there's a leg spinner, there's a fast bowler, there's a wicket keeper, there's a aggressive batsman, there's a fairly Dravid like batsman. So the whole idea is that all these guys will play well at different pitches, right? So we do not know what is the kind of environment which is going to happen. So last 1 year when we had iProve value discovery, a lot of them were asking how is it getting into 4-star or 5-star, because so then we said it's a qualitative thing, because under value we compulsorily needed a particular fund. At that point in time, I had no clue that this year that will be the top performing fund. The whole idea is simple, that we need to combine all these styles together. So don't worry about just picking funds from all the styles. So the way we really look at it is we first pick the styles. So we have 5 styles. First style is quality, which means that very, very high ROE, ROC, but with higher valuation. The second style is contrarian or value, where they go for all beaten down name PSUs, metals, infra, so all the pharma few years back. So all the companies which were impacted, like what Prashant does or Naren does. Then the third would be the mid and small cap. The fourth would be the GARP strategy, or growth at reasonable price, which is more like a mid path between pure quality and pure value, or contrarian. And the last one would be a global. So we have realized that once you mix all these 5 together, each and every year 2 or 3 of these funds rescue you. So all we need to take a call is within value, what is the best fund possible to play it, rather than if we don't use this classification, we'll end up with only 1 or 2 styles. So most likely you will end up with only quality as a style. So you will end up buying SBI, you will end up buying DSP, you will end up buying Axis. So all your funds will be quality. So tomorrow, if quality goes for a toss for some reason, you will be completely, your clients will have a disappointing experience. So our whole idea was split it into 5 equal parts, 20% each. And within each of these styles, find out the best fund. So we have identified 2 or 3 funds, and that's how our whole thought process on fund selection has changed. So whatever happens, we will say within the 5 styles, you pick the best fund. So which means that the fund might not do well compared to the other style, but that's okay. Within the style, I am finding out the best fund to play there. And when you combine it, the results were magical. We found that you are easily getting a 3% kind of an alpha, and easily at some point even it went up to above 5% and stuff. But 3%, 2 to 3% is a reasonable number to look at. So which means that given the fact that we are charging 0.5% to 1% in regular charges, we for us also it's easy to convey our value add, because otherwise it's always the problem that we select only good funds, only good return funds. So that's how we wanted to solve it, and it's working out really well for us. And so that's something that you can probably explore. It's a very interesting, it's a fairly simple concept. It's called factor. It's based on factor investing, and it's a 100-year proven concept. So it's nothing that I have discovered or something. It's just that I gave it a fancy name, and so that clients and all of us can understand it and intuit it. I think the recording will be shared, so that shouldn't be a problem. So we can definitely do it. And yeah, and if required, we can always have one more session if all of us wanted to be a little more elaborate and all that. I know that it has become a little too heavy because both these sessions were heavy. Sorry about that, but yeah, but do let us know. I'm completely open to have yet another session just on this.
Okay, so I think we are now running short of time also. So can we end this session as of now?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
From my side, it's fine. So as long as yeah.
So any questions which are unanswered, definitely we will take it in the emails, and we will reply through emails to you. So now, thank you everyone for participating in the session, and we will be sending you the feedback form. So please provide your input so that it will be useful for our further sessions. So thank you. Goodbye, everyone. Stay safe. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Arun. Thanks a lot, Ram sir.
Thanks everyone. Thanks for joining. Thank you so much. Thanks, Preeta. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Bye.
Bye.